Well, Cynthia McClintock from George Washington University joins me now. She is a political science and international affairs professor with an expertise in Latin American politics. Professor, thank you so much for joining our program today. Let's start with Ecuador first. As Harris mentioned, two polar opposite candidates with very different viewpoints on how to jumpstart the stagnant economy there. Does this vote mostly come down to the economy, particularly under the shadow of the coronavirus pandemic that has really hit that country?
Both the economy and the pandemic are very important. I think also that Guillermo Lasso is trying to build support on the basis of corruption during the Correa government. Arauz is a protege of Correa's, and so that is part of Guillermo Lasso's bid.
We want to move also to Peru, which, unlike Ecuador, has a very crowded field of candidates, none of whom is carrying a majority according to polls. Some voters say they'll even leave their ballot blank. So what does this say about voter confidence and what kind of mandate the eventual winner will have once this is all over?
It's very worrisome. It's very worrisome. The percentage of people opting for none of the above, blank, voiding their ballots is very high in both Ecuador and Peru. I think it's important to mention that Ecuador is holding its runoff today and Peru is the first round. So Peruvians will go to the polls again in early June to select among the two front runners. But as you said, in a field so crowded, this is a field, as you said, 18 candidates in Peru. It started as a large field in Ecuador as well. But there, it was always clear from the start that three candidates were going to be poised for the runoff, whereas in Peru, as you said, there are six, maybe even more, who possibly could emerge later tonight as the two candidates who go to the runoff. And as was mentioned, it's this disgust with the management of the pandemic, the disgust with corruption, all of the economic disaster that has resulted, that has led to Peruvians saying, enough, and we're not interested, and we're not going to do this, and it's just very, very worrisome.
Professor, some are calling this one of the lowest points in Peru's democracy, a very strong statement. Would you agree with that assessment?
Peru has seen difficult days, very, very difficult days before, the era of Sendero Luminoso in the 1980s into the early 1990s, and it was a horrific death toll from a very savage insurgency and a military that was also, very savage. So those were very dark days too, but the tragedy of Peru right now, in terms of having seen a lot of growth, a lot of improvement, and yet, as was mentioned, underinvestment in health, underinvestment in education, and the toll of that is become very, very clear, with the pandemic. Sadly, the exposure of these long-standing problems that had not been corrected, and again, Peruvians now saying, well, maybe it's the far right, maybe it's the far left, but as the base, it's the political bases, the people on the extremes who are saying they're going to vote, whereas people, more in the center are kind of throwing up their hands and they can't talk to friends. The campaigns have not been like they usually would because people can't get out there and campaign freely. People can't talk to each other freely, so it's meant for a very unprecedentedly challenging campaign, which results in this kind of rejection that we've seen. And Ecuador faced a lot of the same problems, but as was mentioned, the pandemic has gotten even worse in the last couple of months. So at least Ecuador was able to hold its first round in a slightly more normal situation.
Professor, thank you so much for joining us. Professor Cynthia McClintock with George Washington University.
Thank you for the invitation.